We're back today to do another comparison video because this one was requested a lot. We've got the Garmin Forerunner 955 and the Garmin Fenix 7. Which one's right for you? Let's talk about it. Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. I'm Dave from Chase the Summit, and in today's video we're going to take a deep dive doing a comparison between the brand new Garmin Forerunner 955 that came out a couple of weeks ago and the good old Garmin Fenix 7 that isn't that old. It came out back in January. If you don't know, the Garmin Fenix 7 is basically the top tier flagship model from Garmin, has all of the features on board, but with the announcement of the Garmin 955, they actually put some bells and whistles in this watch that aren't in that top flagship model. What gives? Before we dive all the way into this video, I do want to give a quick shout out to my friends over at playbetter.com for sponsoring this video. Playbetter.com sells all of the major brands like Garmin, Coros, Polar, Suunto. They've got everything there, and they offer free 2-day shipping and a no-hassle 60-day return policy, which is pretty amazing. You can keep your watch for 2 months and change your mind and send it back for a full refund. So if you're interested in picking up any watch that I show off in this video, check out the links in the description down below because those do help support this channel, and Playbetter is a pretty great place to shop, so check them out. Okay, so in this video, I'm not going to dive too deep into the weeds on any particular feature on either the 955 or the Fenix 7. I'm going to keep this pretty high level. If you want to dive deeper into any specific feature, check out my dedicated review videos for both of these watches, which I'll link up in the corner of this video. Check that video out if you want to see every new feature that came out on these watches. In this video, I kind of want to look at this from a high level to identify which one might be right for you. I'm also going to dive into some weird nuanced features I noticed that are different between the 955 and Fenix 7 within their user interfaces. There's things in there that I haven't seen in other videos on YouTube that I just want to mention in this video, so it makes you aware, so stick around for that. So the watches I have in front of me today are the Garmin Forerunner 955 with this yellow neon band on the left here. On the right, I've got the Garmin Fenix 7X, and then in the middle here, I actually have the Garmin Epix Gen 2. And the reason why I have the Epix Gen 2 around is it's actually the same size as the Garmin Fenix 7, and it basically has all of the same specs with just a different display. These are the watches I have on hand for this comparison, so I'm gonna make it work. All right, let's talk about purchasing options between the 955 and Garmin Fenix 7X. When it comes to the Fenix 7X, like I said before, there are multiple sizes to choose from. The ones I have here is the Garmin Fenix 7X, which is the larger 51mm version. Then there's the Fenix 7 or Epix Gen 2, which is 47mm. And then there's a smaller 42mm version called the 7S, which I don't have on the table here. On top of the multiple size options, there's also different levels that you can choose from the base model to a solar model and a solar sapphire model. And in between there's a whole bunch of color combinations that you can choose from. I'm not going to list off every single model that they offer because that would be wasting your time. I'll just say that they start at about $700 and they go all the way up to about $1,000 here in the USA. When it comes to the Forerunner 955, it is much simpler. There is only one size to choose from. It is 47mm in diameter, and it's about the same size as the middle of the road Garmin Fenix 7. With the 955, there's two versions to choose from. You've got a solar model for $599, and then you have the non-solar model, which is the one I have here, for $499. And the interesting thing with the Forerunner 955 is that the only difference between solar and non-solar is the fact that the solar model has a solar panel on the face of the display, where the non-solar model does not. Other than that, the guts of the watch, every feature is exactly the same. However, on the Garmin Fenix 7, it's a little bit different because if you choose a base model or solar model, you get different features than you would if you chose a sapphire model. With the sapphire model, you actually get more internal storage, and you also get multi-band GPS technology, which we'll talk about a little later on this video. So they've differentiated how the tiers work with the Fenix 7, whereas on the 955, you get the same features regardless of which one you pick. Another big difference between the 955 and the Fenix 7 is going to be the size and weight. Obviously, if you go with the 7X, it is a much bigger watch coming in at 51mm in diameter, but if you do choose the middle of the road Fenix 7 or the Epix Gen 2, It's about the same size as the 955, as you can see here. The watch face of both of these watches is pretty similar. However, one area between these two watches that's very different is going to be the weight. The Garmin Fenix 7 comes in at about 80 grams, depending on which model you choose. You can get the titanium version for like 73 grams, but the steel version or the heavier version is about 80 or 79 grams. And then the Garmin Forerunner 955 comes in at just 52 grams, which is very light for a watch with these capabilities. You barely notice this thing thing on your wrist in terms of weight. Also, for whatever reason, the 955 just feels lower profile. It feels like it stands off my wrist a little bit less and it gets in the way a little bit less. It feels sleeker, lower to my skin, and kind of just gets out of the way, where the Fenix 7 or the Epix Gen 2 can feel a little bit bulky. I think it's because the bezel is a little bit sharp and kind of sticks out a little bit, where the 955 is pretty low profile all around. I mean, they're basically the same size. I'm just saying the feeling of these two watches is very different when you have each one on the wrist. Oh hey, quick interruption. If you're finding this video helpful or fun or entertaining or anything, make sure you give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel down below, because that really helps me out. Okay, back to the video. Okay, now let's talk about design and build quality here. The Garmin Fenix 7 is built like an absolute tank. You've got a metal bezel around the front here. You've also got an entirely metal backplate on the back. The buttons on the Fenix 7 are also entirely made out of metal, and when you click them, they have a really nice satisfying click to them that doesn't feel mushy or spongy or anything like that. It's just really satisfying. And depending on the model you choose with the Fenix 7, you also have the ability to get a sapphire lens, like on this model here's the Solar Sapphire, which is incredibly scratch resistant compared to the Gorilla Glass on the base model. And if you opt for a DLC coating, which is available on some models as well, that again is a much more durable and robust coating on the metal parts of the watch, which prevent it from scratching. It's not to say it's scratch proof. Anything can scratch if you hit it hard enough, but the DLC coating and the sapphire lens certainly helps quite a bit in that department. Now, when it comes to the Forerunner 955, it is a much different story. This watch is almost entirely made out of plastic. The bezel's plastic, the body's plastic, the back is plastic. The only thing metal is the buttons themselves. And when it comes to the glass on the display, again, this time around, they've used Gorilla Glass DX, which is a durable mineral glass. However, it's not as scratch resistant as something like the Sapphire on the Fenix 7X. Another difference with build quality is the water resistance between these two watches. The Forerunner 955 is waterproof to about 5 atmospheres or 50 meters, where the Fenix 7 is waterproof to 10 atmospheres, which is double that of the 955. That difference in water resistance probably won't matter to most. You can still use either one of these watches for swimming in a pool or open water. It really doesn't matter unless you're planning on deeper water diving. And of course, the Fenix 7 and Epix Gen 2 have a mil-spec rating, which means they've been tested for shock and water resistance, where the 955 does not. All right, now let's talk about the displays between the Fenix 7 and Forerunner 955. I'm gonna move the Epix Gen 2 aside for a second here because it's kind of cheating. The OLED display on camera looks much nicer, but the transflective displays on these other watches is a very functional tool. So when it comes to the Fenix 7, because there are multiple size options, there's also multiple display sizes. So on the Fenix 7X I have here, it's got the largest display because it's the biggest watch at 1.4 inches. And if you go down to the Fenix 7S, it goes all the way down to 1.2 inches. So there's a variable in the size of the display here. On the Garmin Forerunner 955, it's got a 1.3 inch display, which is the same size as the Epix Gen 2 or the standard Fenix 7. And both watches use the same display technology. So it's a memory in-pixel display that's transflective. So when you're in direct sunlight, it's very easy to read. Basically, the more sunlight that hits the watch face, the easier it is to read. And in the dark, as you can see here, there is a backlight that you can trigger with a button on the side or with a gesture by raising your wrist. The interesting thing between the Forerunner 955 and the Fenix 7 is that the Forerunner 955 seems to have one of the better backlights on the market in terms of transflective displays. It gets really bright, it's got really good contrast, and it's a joy to look at. It's almost as good as something like an OLED or an LCD. Not quite there because it is transflective, but it does look really good. And the Garmin Fenix 7 is no slouch either. It's also really good. I just feel like the 955 gets a little bit brighter and looks a little bit more crisper, but they're pretty similar in this department, so there's not a huge difference. Okay, now I want to talk about the user interface on both of these watches because they're very similar, but there's also some very strange differences between these two, and I feel like this is going to take up the brunt of this video. Both the Garmin Forerunner 955 and Fenix 7 have a touch-enabled display, so I'm able to swipe through the widgets of the watch very easily. There's there's no lag or anything. They're both very responsive. And, at first glance, they almost look identical when it comes to the menu system. Both the Fenix 7 and 955 have a slew of features built into their user interface, including offline music storage on both watches, an intuitive user interface with touch controls. You've got smartwatch features for reading text messages, calendar integration so you can see people's birthdays and meetings coming up, and you've got wellness features like step tracking, calories burned, body battery, which is a Garmin specific thing, and stress tracking built into both of these watches. Both the 955 and Fenix 7 also have have advanced training tools like estimated VO2 max, training load, training status, recovery advisor, and more. And both also offer full navigation and mapping capabilities with offline maps that are built directly into the watch. Basically, these are the same watch in almost every way, but the 955 currently has a few new features like training readiness, HRV status, and the race calendar that are available only on the 955 for now. However, these are going to come to the Fenix 7 via a firmware update. That firmware update has not happened yet at the time of filming this video, but I'm sure it's coming soon. With all that being said, you might assume that these two watches are identical, like they're the same guts inside and they do the exact same thing. And for the most part, you'd be right, but there are some weird, subtle differences I want to talk about now. First of all, let's take a look at the Garmin Fenix 7. The Fenix 7 has an ambient light sensor built into the face of the display. So when you're using the watch and you've got the backlight on, you can actually cover the watch with your palm like this and turn the backlight off. If we take a look at the Forerunner 955 and do the same thing, you can see that the display does not turn off. This does not have an ambient light sensor turned in, so I can't do that palm thing to turn off the display. Another weird difference between these watches is that some of the widgets actually perform differently depending on the watch they're on. So here we've got the Garmin Fenix 7, and I'm looking at the barometer widget, which actually has a full graph of the past 24 hours. And you can see here, if I scroll with my finger, I can actually scroll back in time through the barometer readings to see previous hours on the barometer. Now, if we look at the barometer widget on the Forerunner 955 I have here, try to scroll back in time here, you can see nothing happens. You can't scroll back on the graphs in the 955. And this goes for all widgets that have graphs. This could be the stress graph or the body battery, anything like that. You can't scroll back on the 955 while you can on the Garmin Fenix 7. I don't know why. It's a weird difference between the two, but this is the case. Another difference between the Fenix 7 and 955 is when it comes to the mapping and navigation. I found this one to be really interesting. Like I said before, both these watches do have full offline mapping and navigation with topo maps downloaded directly to the watch, which is great. They're both very powerful in this department, but there are some differences. So if we look at the Garmin Fenix 7X here, you can see that I can touch and drag around the screen to navigate the map, which is super cool. And if I want to, I can actually double tap and dive in and zoom in even further just by double tapping on the map. There's also another gesture I can do here. If I zoom out a little bit, you can see that I can touch and hold, and I get some options for go, save location, review, etc. So there's some gestures you can use within the mapping and navigation on this watch, which are super useful, especially that double tap to zoom thing. Now, if we look at the Forerunner 955, you can see, yes, I do have a map on here. It does have details on it, and I can touch the map and navigate around just like on the Garmin Fenix 7. However, there's one big difference here. If you see, if I double tap, it doesn't actually zoom in. What it's doing is kind of jumping around the screen. It's kind of very confusing what's going on here. But if I double tap, I don't actually zoom into the map. And again, if I go ahead and touch and hold, you can see nothing happens here. Nothing happens if I touch and hold. So I can't do that navigation on the fly by touching and holding and saying go and routing to that point. I have to actually go in and find that location in the navigation menu in order to use the navigation features. Don't get me wrong, these issues aren't showstoppers. It shouldn't stop you from buying a Forerunner 955. It's just weird to me that they're different. Like, why don't they just take the firmware from the Fenix 7 and put it in the 955? I don't quite get that. These aren't the only differences. There's a whole bunch of these little nuanced differences throughout the entire menu system. For instance, on the Garmin Fenix 7, there's something called sleep mode, which allows you to customize your power mode for sleeping. So it dims down your display. It can actually turn off the display entirely while you're sleeping. And there's a bunch of settings there. Now on the 955, you don't have that proper sleep mode, but there is a setting for sleep in the display settings to dim down your display. It's just a little bit different there. And on that note, one more final difference between the 955 and Garmin Fenix 7 is that the Garmin Fenix 7 has something called power modes. These are modes that you can customize to tailor your power consumption for different situations. Okay, now let's talk about multi-band GPS technology. Like I said when we talked about purchasing options at the beginning of this video, depending on the model you choose on the Garmin Fenix 7 will depend whether or not you actually get multi-band GPS. If you get the base model or the solar model Fenix 7, you do not get multi-band GPS. You get standard GPS, which is the same as the Fenix 6 and previous models. Now on the Forerunner 955, you always get multi-band GPS. It doesn't matter which model you buy, it's on every single 955 out there. So you might be wondering, what is multi-band GPS or GNSS and why do I need it? Well, it's basically the gold standard when it comes to GPS technology. It allows your watch to see more satellites at a given time because it can actually use multiple bands or multiple frequencies to look for more satellites. And at the end of the day, more satellites equals better accuracy to your watch because it can triangulate a better position. So when we look at all three of these watches, all three have the same GPS chip inside with multi-band GNSS technology. And when it comes to accuracy, honestly, they're all kind of the same. These watches are some of the highest performing in terms of GPS accuracy on the market out there right now. The Garmin Forerunner 955 is incredibly accurate, and when I paired it up next to the Fenix 7 and went on multiple different runs and then compare the tracks side by side after the runs, they're really hard to tell apart. These are both incredibly accurate watches when it comes to GPS accuracy. And the really interesting thing with these new watches is it really doesn't matter which mode you're in for the most part. If you're out on road run or in the trail run, there's some light tree cover, you're generally gonna get really good accuracy even if you use the basic GPS only option. I think the only reason I'd ever turn on that multi-band GPS mode is if I'm in a slot canyon or I'm next to a big cliff face, or if I'm in an inner city where there's big buildings all around me. That's when you might see an advantage with the multi-band GPS technology turned on. And now that we've talked about GPS, let's talk about battery life because these watches are very different. Again, there's multiple different models of the Fenix 7, and depending on which one you buy, depends on how much battery life you get, because this big Fenix 7X here has a bigger battery in it than this little 955. That's just physics. But if we were to compare the Forerunner 955 to the middle of the road Fenix 7, because they're the closest in size, the Fenix 7 base model without solar will get about 18 days of battery life in smartwatch or standby mode, where the 955 will get about 15 days. So you get about 3 less days with the 955. In terms of GPS mode, when you're out on a running activity, it's a bit different there as well. The base model Fenix 7 without solar can get up to 57 hours in a GPS activity in the GPS only mode, where the 955 can only get up to about 42 hours in the basic GPS mode. I mean, 42 hours is probably enough for most people. That'll still get you through an ultramarathon, 100-mile ultramarathon, but there is more battery life in the Fenix 7. And now let's talk about the heart rate sensors on both of these watches. As you can see here, the Garmin Fenix 7 and Epix Gen 2 and the Forerunner 955 basically have the exact same heart rate sensor. The only difference is that the Forerunner 955 backplate is plastic and the Epix Gen 2 and Fenix 7 is metal. But the sensors actually built into these watches are identical. There's no difference here. So to test the accuracy between these two watches, even though they appear to be the same sensor, I've taken them out on several runs while also wearing an ECG chest strap for a baseline of comparison, because that ECG sensor is way more accurate than any optical sensor. And what's really interesting here is it seems like the Forerunner 955 is a little bit more accurate when it comes to heart rate accuracy compared to the Fenix 7. However, they're both really good. The reason why I think the Forerunner 955 might be a touch more accurate is because it is a lighter watch coming in at just 42 grams, so it bounces around a lot less on my wrist when I'm running. And the key to getting a good solid heart rate reading is to have a really tight watch on your wrist so you can't really fit a finger under it, and to prevent any bouncing while you're running. Okay, final thoughts. Garmin Fenix 7 or Forerunner 955? Which one should you get? Well, it really depends. If you want a robust watch, you plan on abusing it, going hiking with it, maybe you're whacking it off of rocks and stuff like that, the Garmin Fenix 7 is a really solid built watch. It's got a metal bezel, you can get the sapphire display, and it's incredibly robust. However, the Fenix 7 is a more expensive watch, and at the time of filming this, it actually has a few less features compared to the 955, like that training readiness, HRV status, and the race calendar. But it will be coming to the Fenix 7 in a firmware update. We just have to wait for that. This is an incredibly difficult decision. These are both two of the best watches on the market right now. I really have been enjoying my time with the Forerunner 955, but there are some of those weird differences like the mapping and navigation that's just different on the 955 compared to the Fenix 7 that make it a little bit more frustrating to use, and I don't know why they did that. I'd say if you're mainly a runner or triathlete and you don't find yourself abusing your watch or deep water diving or anything like that, the 955 is an excellent watch and you get a lot for your money here. At the end of the day, these are two incredibly powerful sports watches, and I don't think you'll be disappointed either way. I can't make this decision for you. It's up to you how much money you have and which features are important to you before you decide which one to get. All right, friends, we've reached the end of this video. If you found this video helpful or fun or entertaining or just past the time, consider giving me a thumbs up and subscribing down below, because that really helps out my channel. I'd appreciate it. Also, if you're picking up a Fenix 7 or a 955 or the Epix Gen 2 or any watch I I showed off in this video, check out the links in the description down below because they do help support this channel and they cost nothing extra to you, so I'd appreciate it. And that's it. That's all I've got for this one, and yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye!